You're now listening to The Pick is In. The Pick is In Fantasy Football Podcast. And now your host, Matt Kelley.
Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. This is The Pick is In Fantasy Football Podcast. What's up? I am Matt Kelley, going to be talking to Travis Golden today, my good buddy, about some positional battles that are going to be going on throughout training camp. Just want to remind you before we jump in here to follow the show over at The Pick is In FFP on Twitter. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Google, and YouTube. You got all those outlets now, hopefully more soon to come. So a lot of positional battles, training camp battles are set to be going on as camp is finally getting underway. Got some good stuff to talk about here, Travis. And, man, at least so far, it's looking pretty good with the whole COVID testing. I think I saw today with the NFL, it's like 2%. So everybody, I guess, is like on their best behavior in camp, and it's looking like we might get some football.
Yeah, it is looking that way, and I think today was the last day that people could opt out for COVID reasons.
Yeah, the last time that we were on, I got to cover it on another podcast, but the last time you and I were on, nobody of fantasy note had really opted out at that point. Of course, as soon as we got done with the podcast, the Damian Williams news essentially dropped, and so we got all the Clyde Edwards-Helaire fallout from that. Everybody's well aware of that by now, but as of today, I was watching, man, up to the deadline, and no one else of like real fantasy note has dropped out, so you're pretty much in the clear. If anybody drops out at this point, it'll be mid-season, and the ramifications will be what they'll be, but as of today, looks like everybody else is a green light. So let's jump into some of these positional battles, and we're going to start. We've got two groups of quarterbacks to talk about, two groups of wide receivers to talk about, and then three groups of running backs that we're going to talk about. So there's a lot more battles going on than this. It's just what I feel like we can comfortably cover in the time that we have. But we're going to start in Chicago, and we're going to talk about Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles. It's a rough situation there at quarterback. Obviously, the Bears thought they had their guy in Mitch Trubisky a few years ago. Hasn't been the case. The Jags thought they had their guy when they signed Nick Foles to the contract that they signed him to. They have now moved on from Nick Foles and are going with Gardner Minshew. They sent Foles to Chicago, and so now he's battling things out with Mitch Trubisky. And so it's one of these dynamics, man, where it's like the draft capital is battling the guy that you're really paying the big money to. So Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles. What do you think about this situation? Who do you think comes out on top? Are they going to split this thing? What's going to happen here?
This is an awful situation to be in if you're the Bears, to be completely honest with you. I do think Trubisky has potential more upside than Nick Foles does at this point in his career. And I'm just judging that based on the fact that Trubisky does have the threat to run, whereas Nick Foles doesn't. You just have to hope that Trubisky can get those interceptable passes down. A good chunk of, 28 passes were deemed interceptable last year for him?
Yeah, 28. That's a lot, man.
He's got to reduce that by a good chunk. But if he can get that down and he can be a little more consistent and he can get his rushing yards back up to where they were before rather than last year with a career low, I think Trubisky gives you the better upside than Foles does. Foles may be a little more consistent, but I don't know, man. I think I'd lean probably Trubisky here just based on the upside that he has if he can get it all together.
Yeah, I think they're going to give Trubisky, at least on the onset of the season, kind of the one last heave-ho and see if he can get this together because, that first season in 2017, I think it was like 7 touchdowns to 7 interceptions and like a handful of games. Not good. Took
His
a pretty
second
good
year
yeah,
was pretty good.
Second year was pretty decent. Like, it was all right. Still wasn't great with accuracy, but the rushing totals went up. The touchdowns went up. The interceptions, were at an okay level. And then last year, it was just like, man, everything just took a step back. And when you look at Chicago, they had the 12th most pass attempts. They had the 12th most deep ball attempts with 66 there. That's 20 yards or more on a deep ball. And then they were 21st overall in pass yards, 27th in pass touchdowns. something like, those things shouldn't counterbalance like that. They should have a little bit more of a hand-in-hand trend there, and it just didn't work out. And with Nick Foles, I mean, everybody likes to, look, Nick Foles, right place, right time, good for him in Philly and the Super Bowl, but we're talking strictly about fantasy football. And with fantasy, he's only really had like the one good season where he got the 10 starts, had 27 interceptions, not good. 27 touchdowns is good, only had 2 picks that year. And so he's been kind of like riding this wave ever since that one really good year. And I just don't know if he is like a wild upgrade over Mitch Trubisky right now. He's not going to bring really any sort of rushing upside to the table in terms of fantasy. And really, with these guys, I could see this thing getting split. I could see Trubisky coming in for like the first 4 games, and if it doesn't go well, then they turn to Foles. It might look, honestly, it might look a lot like Jacksonville did last year, where, Foles went down, they turned to Minshew. Foles came back healthy, sort of, and then they just kind of played pick'em for the rest of the season. So the biggest worry for me is, what does this do for guys like mostly Allen Robinson? I mean, there's other pieces there too in Anthony Miller and guys like that, David Montgomery, who might, get some more pass work and whatnot this season. But just from a passing perspective, which guy would you feel better about in terms of the fantasy value for Allen Robinson?
If we're going strictly from passing perspective, I think I'd lean a little more towards Nick Foles, just because I think I would trust him a little more, just given, what he's not consistently done, but I haven't seen enough of Trubisky to trust that he's got that accuracy problem solved. I would lean Foles just because what Nick Foles is. You've seen it. He's not any, he's not going to, burn the building down with stats or anything like that, but he's very rarely going to make the mistakes that Trubisky's been making or miss as badly as Trubisky has been missing.
Yeah, and I think that's just a matter of what the Bears kind of want to do from this season forward. If they feel like they find something in Nick Foles, do they move on with him as their future? Because Nick Foles, like I said, he had that good year, but he hasn't like put back-to-back consistent seasons together. So it's like, yeah, we know what he is, but he just hasn't done it for like a good stretch of time. And so, do the Bears at some point look at this season and kind of punt it, or just honestly, they might just be able to let it play out given the quarterback play and move on from both of these guys next season? I think that's a real possibility.
So who a good comparison is for Nick Foles that he reminds me a lot of is Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
They'll both have these great stretches, and then these teams will buy in on them, and then they fall off.
Yeah, purely from that perspective, absolutely. Fitzpatrick, obviously, a little bit more of a gunslinger
for sure.
than Foles. But yeah, from that perspective of just like getting contract and opportunity after opportunity, yeah, those two guys, like a weirdly similar career trajectory, if you will. So let's move on and talk about the Los Angeles Chargers, where we have another quarterback battle in Tyrod Taylor and the 6th pick from this year's NFL draft in Justin Herbert. The thing about this situation is, I think Joe Burrow is really the only rookie quarterback who is set to take over from day one this season. When you look at this situation, obviously the Chargers, they're moving on from Phillip Rivers, a guy who had started, practically every game for them. I think it's for like the last 15, 16 seasons. And so it's the first time in a long time that the Chargers aren't suiting up with Phillip Rivers there. So neither of these guys are going to be yardage monsters the way Phillip Rivers was. And I think both of these guys have some different effects for the ancillary pieces there in Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, and the like. So for me personally, I think this is a battle of how long can Tyrod keep up, looking like he can keep the Chargers in a winnable position versus the Chargers themselves, the front office, wanting to see Herbert, and how long does it take Herbert to kind of pick up to the NFL pace, especially since there's been no camp, there's not going to be any preseason games. So how many, if you had to put a number on it, how many games do you think Tyrod gets to start this season? Do you think he goes the whole way? Do you think it's kind of split like we were talking about with Foles and Trubisky, or where do you lean here?
I think Tyrod. If I'm the Chargers, I would want to see what Herbert's got, but like you said, with no camp, he's kind of at a disadvantage right now. So Tyrod's got the leg up there. I would see Tyrod playing anywhere between 4 and maybe 8 games, and then depending where they are, which the Chargers have a great defense, but I think I could see Justin Herbert taking over maybe midway through the season just to kind of, get him some actual game experience and see how he handles that, and just use the first few weeks of the season or first several weeks of the season kind of as his camp, so to speak. But I do think Tyrod gets at least 4 starts.
Yeah, and I mean, the good news for Tyrod Taylor is the schedule is really where he can buy himself some more time and some more starts. So they start off the season at Cincinnati. Not terribly worried about that defense. Now, they do play the Chiefs, whose defense picked up towards the end of last season, but for fantasy purposes, Tyrod is definitely going to have to throw to try to keep up with the Chiefs. Then they get the Panthers at home. That's a defense that is having to meld together a bunch of rookies there. The Buccaneers, a very beatable pass defense. The Saints, and then they get the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Jags. Those are all decent spots for Tyrod Taylor to produce. And so just given that schedule, I think he might actually get through the first half of the season. And if that's the case, then I think it's a place where you can maybe start him in plus matchups. If you're in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex league, I think you can actually turn to Tyrod for, like you said, maybe the first 4, 6, 8 games, maybe even more. And I think really, if they had the possibility to redshirt Herbert, so to speak, for this first season, man, I think they might do it. And the only problem from that perspective is, what does this mean for the guys around? When I watch Justin Herbert, he's definitely more of a pocket guy than Tyrod, right? He doesn't use that first instinct to take off. He's not like Lamar or Kyler or Josh Allen, where he sees it and he's just going to take it to the house or anything like that. But he's kind of like Mahomes, Dak sort of running style, where it's like, if it's there, he can take it. He's athletic enough to get out of the pocket. But, for Keenan Allen is really the other main pass catching piece here, other than Austin Eckler, obviously out of the backfield. But first and foremost, what does it do for Keenan Allen for you if Tyrod is the guy?
Keenan Allen's stats would suffer if Tyrod is the guy. Tyrod is not gonna blow you away with the passing stats. He's one of those guys where he'll throw for 20 touchdowns a year, and when he did start in Buffalo, I think that was his career high. But he's also not going to throw a lot of picks. But that's because the way the Bills ran their offense then was similar to, I think, how the Chargers are going to have to run theirs now with Tyrod under center. He's not going to win you a game, so he's not going to go out like Phillip Rivers was and be the gunslinger. So that's Keenan Allen benefited greatly from that. Tyrod Taylor's not that guy. Justin Herbert could be that guy. But with Tyrod, I think Allen is going to, kind of regress a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really what people need to realize with Keenan Allen. The talent is still there. Keenan Allen, as far as a talent and wide receiver, in my opinion, still an elite guy. But the problem is for Tyrod, he's never thrown. I think it's 3,500 yards is what is basically his ceiling, and then he's going to run some as well to kind of provide his fantasy value. But if the pie, so to speak, is only 3,500 yards versus what Phillip Rivers was throwing for, 42, 44, 4,600 yards a season, it's just a much smaller share to go around for everyone. And so, if Keenan Allen still has like let's call it a 20% target share, and it's only 3,200 yards, man, you better hope Keenan Allen has like a 95% catch rate, is really all I can say there. And for Austin Eckler, look, Phillip Rivers really got to be the check down king, and especially last year because that offensive line was bad. And so a lot of times his first read was Austin Eckler. It wasn't Keenan Allen. It wasn't Mike Williams. It wasn't Hunter Henry. It was Austin Eckler. And so I think a lot of that pass volume, while Eckler is good for it, I don't know that he'll necessarily see that same pass volume with Tyrod. I know he did okay with Shady there in Buffalo, and he had some okay value. But when you look at what Eckler had last season, I don't think it's a repeatable mark.
I agree. Even if the Chargers tried to address the offensive line a little bit, so you may see a tiny bit of an improvement there because they did trade for Trey Turner from the Panthers.
Right.
But I don't think you're going to see, like you said before, Tyrod's cap on passing yards is going to be significantly lower than what Rivers was throwing for. So naturally, both players, Allen and Eckler, should see a regression if Tyrod is the guy.
When you look at these guys, especially if we're talking about redraft, maybe they're trade targets for midseason when Herbert comes in. I could see Herbert definitely checking down to Eckler a little bit more. Maybe he finds Hunter Henry a little bit more. He's a pretty accurate guy. I mean, I watched some tape on him over the weekend, and I mean, at least in college, obviously the college game is very different, but he looked like he had a pretty good arm, pretty spot on as far as accuracy goes, nothing wild, quite like Josh Allen or something like that. But, I think he could overall help the value of the pass catchers. It's just a matter of how quickly the Chargers are going to end up turning to Justin Herbert. So let's move on to our first wide receiver positional battle here, and we're going to go over to the New York Giants. Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, very different guys, very different points in their career as well. And so this is one of those situations I look at. They're coming in with Daniel Jones, who technically should be better this year. He wasn't terrible last year. He just had a lot of turnover problems, which isn't horribly uncommon for a rookie. But I do like what Daniel Jones has to offer there. I think he can create fantasy value for all of these guys. I just don't necessarily know that it will be equal for all of them. It looked like he had a pretty good rookie connection there with Slayton towards the end of the season. Shepard obviously has a little bit of a problem staying on the field with concussions. And then Golden Tate, he's just kind of still around. He's not bad, but he's just kind of still around, which, I mean, for fantasy, he actually provided some value when he was on the field last year. But if you're choosing one of these guys and we're in a vacuum, let's just say they all are the same average draft position for sake of conversation here, which guy do you prefer? Which guy do you least prefer here in this situation in New York?
I think who I would prefer most out of this is Darius Slayton. I do think he has that connection with Daniel Jones more so than the other two guys do. And as a rookie last year, he put up 48 catches for 740 yards and he had 8 touchdowns. That's pretty good rookie numbers for not being like the guy. The guy I would least prefer out of this, man, that's tough. Like you said, Golden Tate, when he's on the field, gives you numbers. He had 6 touchdowns last year. He had 49 catches. Sterling Shepard seems to be he had 57 catches I think last year.
He did,
but his yardage is low.
Yeah, that's the thing. And he did have a connection, though, with Daniel Jones. It looked like he had 85 total targets over 10 games. So if you extrapolate that out over the course of the season, obviously he would have been well over 100 total targets. And I think he may have been the only player at that rate for the Giants. And so, yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm on the Darius Slayton bandwagon here. He looked like he had an electric connection with Daniel Jones. And when he gets the ball in his hands, man, there is a very real chance every time that guy touches the ball that it could go all the way to the house. And so for me, as an upside, I'll take Darius Slayton all day. Sterling Shepard's kind of second on the list for me just because it does seem like Daniel Jones is turning his way. I think, if you get enough targets, especially if you're in a PPR setup, he's going to provide value just because he's going to be getting a ton of targets, and he's going to be, that's eventually going to mean catches. And Golden Tate is just kind of like, if I get Golden Tate, fine, but are you going to be super confident this year in Golden Tate as even a flex play like that? I mean, that's kind of where I see him. It's just like, if you get him as a flex, like, it's just kind of like, all right.
I mean, it'd be, that'd be my reaction to it, basically.
Yeah.
Like, man, I mean, I guess he's serviceable there, but you're really hoping that, I agree, Slayton is the guy. I do think if Shepard can, show that last year's yardage totals were an anomaly, then I would lean more that way, as him being the second guy, just because you do have more big play threat with Slayton than you do with Shepard. But if you look at Shepard's stats on paper right now. Last year's yardage total was the anomaly, but that is also the year they changed quarterback.
Right.
So you gotta have to hope that is, it was a fluke, and that this next, with Daniel Jones coming in, more experienced, that improves some. But with the big play potential, I think I would just lean Slayton.
Yeah, and that's where I lean as well. Especially, because basically any of these guys, you're going to be playing them most likely in your flex. Maybe if you're starting 3 wide receivers, you throw them in as your 3rd wide receiver, but most likely they're going to be a flex option. And at that point, give me the guy that is, going to rip off a 70-yard touchdown at some point. Slayton's average target distance last year was 14.1 yards per target. That was good for 19th in the league, which, not too shabby, man, for a rookie. And I think that connection is only going to grow there with Daniel Jones. So let's talk about our second wide receiver battle here. We're going to move on to the Houston Texans. DeAndre Hopkins has departed. God bless you, Texans fans. I am so sorry for Bill O'Brien, but that's just the boat that the boat that you're in. So insert Brandon Cooks, insert Randall Cobb. You still have Will Fuller and Kenny Stills there. This one, honestly, I think is even more muddled than the Giants' pass catchers. These guys, in theory, Brandon Cooks should be the guy. But Brandon Cooks has 5 documented concussions. Grant you, he's only missed 2 games. But you and I were talking a little bit before the show, and once you have 1 concussion, they tend to follow more closely from there on out throughout your career, 2, 3, and as we see, he's now up to 5 concussions. And so it worries me a little bit, man, that Brandon Cooks could be like 1 hit away from just being done.
Yeah. And that's, I think I would stay away if you had all 3 of these guys available at one time. Cooks would not be the guy for me because of that. I don't trust players in fantasy that have a hard time staying healthy because, you get points out of them for a few weeks and then they're done. So that's why I would lean more towards somebody like, in this particular scenario, would be Randall Cobb. Just because he is the guy on that team right now that usually plays most of the games in the season that he's, for the team that he's on. Will Fuller gets hurt all the time. Brandon Cooks has the concussion issue. Cobb is the consistent guy who is usually available and will produce. He had 55 catches last year with Dallas, 830 yards.
Yeah, and Cobb's overall average draft position right now is pick number 235. In other words, he's basically going undrafted in your normal 12-team setup. So Randall Cobb's still going to have value, man. And he's now getting, not that Dak is bad, but he's going from Dak over to Deshaun Watson. I don't necessarily want to say Deshaun's an upgrade, but he's at least a lateral move, in my opinion. So I think Cobb's going to be able to provide pretty good value here, and he's going to be the cheapest of all of these guys. Brandon Cooks is going to be a mid-round pick. Somebody is probably going to take Will Fuller as a mid-round pick as well. Obviously, Fuller is so electric when he is on the field with Deshaun Watson. They've shown this touchdown connection. Deshaun will just bomb it to him, man. He just doesn't care because he just feels he has that much confidence that Will Fuller is going to be there. Even though Fuller had 6 drops last season on deep targets, he still had 23 deep. Deshaun threw him 23 deep targets, man.
That's insane.
It was the 19th most in the league, and he obviously missed time once again with the hamstring. Mostly has been the bugaboo there for Will Fuller. So, man, if you could tell me Will Fuller was going to stay on the field for even 12 games, I'd be like, dude, give me Will Fuller. Absolutely.
Right. So this goes back to a conversation you and I had on, I think, the first
about
show we
AJ
did
Green.
about AJ Green.
Yeah.
If you could tell me that Will Fuller, if you could guarantee me 10 to 12 games of Will Fuller, I'm down.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, well, do you really know you're going to get that? It's like he played in 11 last year, but he's never played an entire season. He's every year he's been in the league, he's missed at least 1 game. Missed at least 2 games. And every year he's been in the league.
And the other hard part about both Cooks and Fuller, these injuries, man, they tend to last a while. The NFL is starting the concussion protocol is more stringent than it's ever been. Obviously, there's more attention being paid to concussions nowadays. So it's weird and fickle when it might hit for Brandon Cooks. And then with Will Fuller, man, you pull a hamstring and then you try to come back too quick, and there's another regression there as far as the timetable. And that's the hard part is, if Will Fuller starts a game and he yanks a hamstring again on like the third play in a game, you're getting nothing from Will Fuller that game, and then how many ever games he misses there on after that. So I'm kind of with you here. If I'm targeting one guy, it's probably going to be Randall Cobb, and I'm just going to snag him with my last pick. And, I honestly feel just as good about Randall Cobb as I would have as I would have Golden Tate.
Right. Yeah, and going back to Will Fuller being hurt, and he's yanking a hamstring. His game is built on speed. That's what Will Fuller is. Yeah. He's a burner.
Yeah.
So it's hard to be that guy when you take off running and you pull your hamstring, and that's it. Your game is based on that speed, and like you said, trying to come back too soon. Randall Cobb for me is the pick here.
Yeah, and I do think these targets are going to get a little bit more spread around. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins had over 150 targets pretty much every year that he was there in Houston. I don't see any of these guys getting near that workload. I do think Cooks, if he can stay on the field, has a decent chance of going over 100 targets. He's the only guy that has multiple 1,000-yard seasons, so he can do it. It's weird that he's basically done that with a different team every single time, but he's shown that he can do it. Deshaun Watson, obviously a capable quarterback. So, if I thought Cooks was really going to stay on the field, I would probably lean that way. But given that you're getting Randall Cobb for free, man, give me some Randall Cobb, and I think you'll be plenty happy on more than one occasion this week. Plug in Randall Cobb into your flex position. So let's move on to the running backs. Now, we did a Twitter poll this past week about which situations people were most interested in for fantasy purposes. We've already talked about the quarterbacks and the pass catchers. Mostly everyone was interested in the Tampa Bay running backs and then the Washington running backs. They're going to be our last two topics of conversation here today. But we're going to start with this one battle that is interesting because it's in one of the best offenses in all of the NFL. Talking about the Baltimore Ravens, we have Mark Ingram. Technically, we have Gus Edwards as well. We'll bring him up for the sake of bringing him up. And then the rookie in J.K. Dobbins. So, obviously, this offense as a whole was electric last season. You and I were kind of talking, man, in the middle of the NFL season, I'm all about the NFL, and I'll worry about college, for the sake of my dynasty leagues and things like that after the season is over. And so I went back, watched some more on J.K. Dobbins, and I see why the Ravens went Dobbins, man, because he's a one-cut running back, and then the dude is just going to go, and if you can catch him, friggin' good luck, man. So the Ravens are just, the rich get richer in this particular situation. He's also a pretty smooth pass catcher. I think he easily passes Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards for the passing down work here, as long as he can pass block as well. But kind of going back to the quarterbacks, how many, we were talking about how many games does this guy get? Do you think Mark Ingram gets the full season? He's going into I believe it's his age 30 season. He'll be 31 there in December. Do you think Mark Ingram makes it all the way through the season as the lead dog, or do you think Dobbins will find a place in the season to usurp the most of that workload there in Baltimore?
I think Dobbins will probably creep in there and take a lot more of those carries as the season goes on. For two reasons. One, I do think Dobbins is going to he's going to show them that he's going to be the guy. And I do think that if you want, pushing later into the season, you want to keep Mark Ingram healthy, because you're going to need a running back like that in the playoffs to kind of pound, defenses into submission, basically. And let's face it, the Ravens are making the playoffs, so they're going to need somebody. They're going to need somebody like
that's
Mark
probably
Ingram.
a lock, unless Lamar goes down.
They're going to need somebody like Mark Ingram to kind of, one, you want to be able to share that load as well as the season goes on, so then both guys are fresher. But I do think as the season goes on, you will see Dobbins have more of an impact on that offense.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, if it wasn't such a weird offseason and we had training camp and we had all of the preseason games, I think Dobbins might come closer to a 50-50 split at the beginning of the season. But because that's not the case, I just don't, I don't think he'll take over immediately. Now, Ingram had a good season last year, but what people also need to understand, that the rushing was great. That's fine. He had 200 attempts. I don't see that really being a problem. Now, he did have 10 rushing touchdowns. The Ravens' offense as a whole will probably regress a little bit. Can he repeat 10 rushing touchdowns? Probably. I'm not going to say certainly, but there is a strong possibility just given how good this offense is. Where I have a problem with Mark Ingram kind of repeating any sort of stats is the 5 receiving touchdowns. Up until last season, he had 5 for his entire career. So I think the 5 receiving touchdowns for him was an anomaly. And kind of what I was talking about earlier is Dobbins is a smooth enough pass catcher. He's definitely more electric at this point in his career as a pass catcher than Mark Ingram or Gus Edwards. And so I think he goes ahead and picks up a lot of that work, and I think he could be the beneficiary of some of these receiving touchdowns.
I agree. I do think you'll see Dobbins become more of that third down back when they're in third and long situations, just for the pass catching situation.
As long as he can pass block.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing is, like you mentioned, that Ingram had 5 receiving touchdowns for his entire career up until last year. 4 of those came in 1 year.
Yeah.
In 2016.
Yeah, so he's had 2 years, one with 5, one with 4, and then a random season where he happened to get one. Obviously, he was there with Kamara and others for a long time there in New Orleans, and so Kamara getting the bulk of the pass opportunities there. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're just, I don't think you can draft Ingram to be what he was last season with the addition of Dobbins and then expecting the touchdowns to regress.
I think Dobbins is going to end up being the guy. Sooner or later in the season, Dobbins is going to be the guy
it'll take a while
in Baltimore. It will, yeah, and like you said, it's going to come down to there's no camp, there's no preseason game, so the Ravens are going to, like every other team probably will, they'll roll with what they know at the beginning of the season, and then as the season goes on, those players will show what they've got, and then that's when you'll start seeing the Ravens start to adjust to probably closer to a 50-50 split as the season goes on.
All right, so let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back situation. It has gotten a little bit murky. Some people are in on the rookie, some people are in on the incumbent, and then they brought in LaShawn McCoy as well. So Ronald Jones there as the incumbent. Keyshawn Vaughn drafted in the 3rd round, I believe it was, for the Buccaneers. So man, the Rojo hype train, especially on Twitter, has really gotten going these last couple of weeks. Bruce Arians coming out this past week and saying that Rojo is pretty much going to carry the bulk of the workload, this early down workload there in Tampa. Now, the interesting thing about Ronald Jones is he was only on the field for Tampa Bay last year 37.5% of the time, but he still got 172 carries. Now, it led to 724 yards. I don't think a lot of people know that he had 31 catches. Not too shabby there. Rojo's ADP is starting to creep up there to the point where I'm not 100% comfortable with it. Like, he was definitely going to be your 3rd running back, but now people are hyping him to kind of just be their RB2. Are you comfortable enough with Ronald Jones to make him your 2nd running back?
No.
Thank you.
No, it's that simple. No, I'd agree with you and kind of where he was before. I think RB3 is a good spot for him. He produced while he was on the field, which wasn't that much in the grand scheme of, how many plays that they ran. I do think he's going to be the guy to start the season. And now what that could entail, he may get you, like you said, he does get a lot of receptions out of the backfield for a running back. So that may help you a little bit at the beginning, but I don't think he should be your 2nd running back.
Yeah, I'm not that confident in Ronald Jones as a 2nd running back. As a 3rd running back, I'm comfortable. Like, I would turn towards Ronald Jones as a 3rd running back. But let's talk about Bruce Arians' running backs as a whole for a second. So Bruce Arians running backs, 2013, Rashard Mendenhall, 217 carries, 687 yards. Andre Ellington, a secondary running back there, 118 carries, 652 yards. So Bruce Ellington, combining two guys there. Bruce Arians showing that he will commit to a guy, Rashard Mendenhall getting almost 100 more carries than Andre Ellington, despite Andre Ellington being way more efficient. So Bruce Arians will just go with this guy. So if he says Ronald Jones is the guy, like I tend to believe that's what's going to happen. In 2014, Andre Ellington became the guy. 201 carries, 660 yards. Not great for fantasy. Chris Johnson, 196 attempts in 9 games started, so he definitely would have been the guy. Insert David Johnson at the end of that season. He got 125 carries over 5 games. 2016, that was the big David Johnson year. 293 attempts, by far the most attempts that anyone has gotten in a Bruce Arians offense. By far the most productive a running back has ever been in a Bruce Arians offense. 2017, we move on to the David Johnson injury. I think he broke his wrist or whatever it was in the first game of the season. So they had that weird mix of like Adrian Peterson and Kerwin Williams. Nobody saw over 150 attempts. And then we move into Tampa Bay last year. Ronald Jones, 172. Peyton Barber, 154. And we mentioned the yards just a bit ago. 724 yards on 172 carries. And so the thing about Rojo is, man, like, he'll get the workload. But for fantasy, I can't tell you that it's going to be, like, I don't know that his ADP can go up much more and he actually returned value.
Yeah, like, just going by, like, breaking it down like you just did with Bruce Arians running backs, none of them have ever, like, lit the league on fire except for David Johnson that 1 year. So I don't see Ronald Jones doing that. I can just see him staying as an RB3 and being okay with that. I do not see how he can creep up into your second running back spot. I just don't understand it.
No, and I mean, if you've gotten Ronald Jones in drafts up to this point, you've probably gotten him at a decent ADP enough to be able to lean on him, and now it's kind of a luxury to have him as your third running back or in that flex spot, and so totally good with that. Now, I watched Keyshawn Vaughn, again, went back and had to watch some college tape here. So Keyshawn Vaughn, 198 carries, 1,000 yards his last season in college. And so, he's shown that he can take on a pretty decent workload. So from that perspective, that's pretty good. It showed Ronald Jones go down. Now, he did run a 4.51 40. Now, I'll probably say this, as the podcast goes on. I don't put as much stock into 40 times as a lot of people do. The 40-yard dash is a very technical run. Some of these kids are trained very differently, and a 4.51 on just a strict 40-yard dash is not necessarily the same as it is in game speed. That being said, I watched Keyshawn Vaughn. I didn't see him pulling away from a lot of people. He's got some good vision. He's got good balance. But he just doesn't look like he's gonna be the guy to break off an 80-yard run. Ronald Jones kind of the same way. He's got good contact balance. He'll run a couple of guys over, but he's not necessarily pulling away from a bunch of guys. So if I am taking a running back out of this backfield, it's Ronald Jones. The addition of LaShawn McCoy doesn't really look. The guy's 32. He was a healthy scratch a number of times for the Chiefs last year. Do you care about LaShawn McCoy for this season?
Nope. I don't. I've watched a lot of Chiefs games, and just watching LaShawn McCoy last year, you could tell. Like, he'd have moments where he would look like the old LaShawn McCoy, but he's on the tail end. In this situation, on these three guys, no, I would not worry about him at all.
Yeah, the one downfall for Ronald Jones could be his pass blocking. Wasn't great last year. It's hard to get great at it when you're only on the field at 37.5% of the time. He's obviously shared some hype videos there on Twitter, working on pass blocking, working on catching. I think he got a jugs machine. He's catching like 300 balls a day or something. So, I mean, the dude's putting in the work. I'm rooting for him. I'm not anti Ronald Jones. Don't hear what I'm not saying there. Not anti Ronald Jones whatsoever. Hope the guy does well. But I'm not comfortable with him as a running back 2. Happy with him as a running back 3. Keyshawn Vaughn, honestly, I'm not touching him either. In his rookie season, I do think Rojo is going to get most of the work here in this Bruce Arians backfield. And yeah, Shady, I think there's honestly a world where Shady doesn't even make the team. So not going to worry about LaShawn McCoy. If you're in on Ronald Jones, be in on Ronald Jones. Don't be out because of LaShawn McCoy. The last situation that we're going to talk about here is the Washington football team backfield, and boy, is it crowded. Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis, Bryce Love, and Antonio Gibson. It's definitely muddled. The guy that stands out for me is still Darius Geis. I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at that because of the injury history with Geis. Look, I'm not saying it's great, but I'm definitely saying he's their most talented running back when he's on the field. He looked good in the limited work that he had last season, looked good in college. Adrian Peterson, oh man, it's just one of those things where, he saw less than half the snaps last season, got 211 carries, and then only had 898 yards, which, I mean, okay, but if you're Ron Rivera and you have this all this younger talent, including Dwayne Haskins, Terry McLaurin, don't you want to see what you got? Aren't you kind of just hoping to move away from Peterson sooner rather than later?
Yeah, and Peterson's 35.
Yeah.
So I'd rather have...
I mean, he's not human, so compared to the normal 35-year-old...
That is fair.
Yeah.
That is a very fair point. But he is 35 in a running back position, which they take a beating. I'd rather... like you said, there's I don't know that he even makes the team. Like, if the other guys on Washington stay healthy, I could see a situation where Ron Rivera just lets Peterson go.
Yeah, and Rivera, I mean, you and I being Panthers fans, we know Rivera is highly known for being a character guy. Obviously, Peterson, some character issues here and there in his time in Arizona, and even before that with Minnesota. And so it wouldn't shock me if Rivera just decides he wants to move on from Adrian Peterson. Now, obviously, we're in the COVID life right now, and so there is a possibility where they have to keep more running backs just out of necessity. And so for that reason, maybe Peterson stays in there. But if I'm looking to own one guy out of this backfield, it is Darius Geis. He's in that same boat. He's in that same average draft position as Ronald Jones, who we were just talking about before. You and I, we watched this Washington football team last season shred the Panthers defense.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, it was definitely rough. Adrian Peterson and Darius Geis shredded that defense. So obviously you can't base it just on that. But if you go back and actually watch Darius Geis, man, this guy is electric. And I get why Washington is like, okay, we're going to keep giving you chances to get healthy and prove that you can be the guy. And I think if he's there, man, I'm cautiously optimistic because the injuries that he's having, guys come back from these things and they produce nowadays. It's not the same as it was back in the day where, if you tore an ACL or whatnot, your career was just kind of in the dumpster. I think Darius Geis can actually come back from these injuries and be productive. And if I'm sitting there facing Ronald Jones versus Darius Geis, give me the guy that can break out. I think Ronald Jones, his ceiling is kind of capped. I just don't think Bruce Arians and that backfield, he's obviously, he's not at the same talent level that David Johnson was when he had that breakout season. So I don't see Ronald Jones putting up those numbers. Darius Geis, I think could be that guy. I think he could break out. I think he could get upwards of 1,200 yards if he stays on the field for all 16 games.
Yeah, and let's not forget, when Darius Geis came out of college, he was a very high draft pick.
Yeah.
That's Washington drafted him wanting him to be the guy. So he's got the talent. And like you said, his injuries are things that they can come back from nowadays. Give him the chance to get healthy. Let him prove that he's healthy. He can be the guy there as the workhorse and just touching back on Ronald Jones, I would take Geis over Ronald Jones. If you could tell me Geis was healthy, I'm taking Geis.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to take the chance. If I'm staring down that decision in a draft, I'm going to take the upside there of Geis. Now, we saw, obviously, Rivera had the luxury of having Christian McCaffrey there for a while in Carolina, but he has had other productive backfields there in his time in Carolina with Jonathan Stewart and the D'Angelo Williams, right? The counterpiece to Jonathan Stewart there. Obviously, they had some productive years when they were on the field as well. So, do you think McCaffrey was the anomaly because he was just so good that they just continued to have him on the field? Or do you think Rivera is going to, if he gets that guy again, is he going to use, would he use guys in the same capacity that he used McCaffrey, or was that more of a Norv Turner thing, you think?
I don't know. Just knowing what I've known, just being a Panthers fan my entire life, seeing all of Ron Rivera's coaching years, the McCaffrey years were the anomaly in Carolina. Every other season was a split backfield between D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. And then, Jonathan Stewart and Christian McCaffrey, and then it was just McCaffrey because McCaffrey was just that good. I don't think Geis is that level, so I don't think they'll do that. I do think that you'll see more of a split in Washington, kind of how you did see in Rivera's earlier Carolina years, because let's face it, Christian McCaffrey is the generational type guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Geis isn't that. So you're going to want to give McCaffrey the ball any chance you can because of the type of player that he is. Geis is not that level, so I do think you'll see more of not a 50-50 split if he's healthy, but more of a split than you would if he was somebody like Christian McCaffrey.
Sure. And so, for that reason, maybe Adrian Peterson sticks it out for a little bit. But if you had to turn towards the other two guys, Love or Gibson, obviously Love got injured, so we haven't seen him either. Rivera had some pretty high praise for Gibson. I think he even likened some of his qualities to Christian McCaffrey. So maybe we pull back on that a little bit. But if you had to pick,
just pump the brakes there.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. I love Riverboat Ron and all that, but McCaffrey is a whole different level of guy. But yeah, man, if I'm looking to play anyone out of this backfield, it's definitely going to be Darius Geis. I don't have huge interest in Peterson this season unless he's just, maybe last round. Maybe you use him as a handcuff to Geis. The other two guys, I mean, we just haven't seen anything. I don't know what that split's going to look like. I don't think you can depend on them for any real fantasy value for 2020.
Agreed.
All right, so that's going to do it for us this week and the positional battles. You can find the show over on Twitter at @ThePickIsInFFP. All your podcast needs, Spotify, Google, and YouTube. Hopefully more platforms here soon. I'm Matt Kelley. That was Travis Golden. This is The Pick Is In Fantasy Football Podcast.